So I just wanted to share something I came across recently, an article about depression, and it was talking about some research that had been done in the early 70s, and it had quite a large cohort of subjects in this research, and they were looking at various approaches to supporting people who were diagnosed or clinically diagnosable as being depressed. And as in many of these studies, they had one group that they actually supported in a medicalised way, both with cognitive therapies and drugs, psychotropic drugs, and the other subjects they supported them with just kindness and sympathy, the sort of things that we usually will offer to people who we know who've experienced some loss. And so what they found at the end of this study was that there was absolutely almost no difference between the two groups. So the group that had been supported in a medicalised way, in a so-called therapeutic way, did not actually make any greater or faster or deeper recovery than people who were not part of that treatment group. And so that was quite a big thing. And I don't know, some of you would remember the 70s, but I guess in the 60s and 70s was when really there were a lot of new drugs coming onto the market, particularly the drugs associated with psychiatric mental conditions, psychotropic drugs and other drugs, this was potentially quite an explosive thing to put out to the world, and so it was actually pushed under the carpet and hidden, because one of the reasons it was hidden was because the American Association of Psychiatrists was just about to release their major compendium of diagnosis and treatment for mental health conditions. And so it would have been quite embarrassing, they felt, to have this research published at that time. And so this manual that they were about to launch on the medical fraternity listed all the known mental health conditions, and also the treatment pathways. And it was really an effort to standardise treatments, have a uniform approach, so that doctors, wherever they were, whatever their training, whatever their experience was, they could consult this compendium and treat their patients accordingly. And so doctors, they took it on board because it was something quite new at that time, and so I guess they felt a sense of security with it, that this was something that they could use, that it was trustworthy. But so soon there was quite a feedback coming to the authors of this compendium that I should say to you that the depression was one of the conditions that was listed in this compendium, and depression was listed. There were 9 symptoms listed for this diagnosis, and for someone to be diagnosed as a depressive, they had to exhibit 5 of these symptoms over a period of a few weeks. And I'll just read you one of them was actually decreased interest in pleasure or a persistent low mood. So that was one of the symptoms that was listed. And so what happened with, in the experience of doctors who were using this approach was that they very quickly realised that if they were to follow the letter of the law, then they would be basically diagnosing every grieving person with depression and treating them with behavioural modification and drug therapy accordingly. And so the authors, the psychiatrists who'd actually put this compendium together, they went back to the drawing board and they came back with a clause, like a rider to this diagnosis, and said basically that if someone had suffered loss of a loved one within a year, that this diagnosis wasn't applicable. So this was called the grief exception clause, and this was verily written down in the manual in each continuing re-edition. And so the next thing that happened was, with the next wave of scientific brainwave about what depression is and how to treat it, was the scientific view that depression was actually a brain chemical disorder, and so an imbalance of chemicals in the brain such as serotonin and other chemicals. And so this then turned the whole thing on its head, and they went, they started whittling away at this exception clause in the manual. And so from the 1 year period that they had begun with as an exception, they started to whittle it down and down and down, from a year to months to weeks to days, and then finally nothing. And so, I guess for someone, for a woman who had, lost her baby shortly after birth, say she gave birth at 10 o'clock in the morning, by 10 past 10 she could be diagnosed and treated with drug therapy according to this definition of depression. And we might laugh at that, but actually 32% of parents who have lost a child are medicated within the first 24 hours. 32%. So that's a very real statistic. So that's still the case today. We might think, well, the Americans are a bit overboard with all that sort of stuff. But in fact, in Australia, we're only second to Iceland in the world for the use of antidepressants. So we're the second highest user of antidepressants in the world. 1 in 10 people in Australia are prescribed antidepressants. So we can see how the natural processes of grief, of loss, of sadness, can very easily be medicalised, pathologised, and how that can cause complications for people in the process, in actually just in the headlight. Being able to move in a natural way through that grief process. So there are many methods that the Buddha, or many methods and many teachings that the Buddha offers us in terms of both understanding and healing and coming to terms with grief in all its forms. And I guess the main starting point is always the understanding of impermanence, the truth of impermanence. So everything that is born will die. So we tend to believe that in an intellectual way when things are not causing us pressure, but I guess when the emotions are entangled in that thinking and the attachment is great, then we lose perspective of that. So I just want to tell you a couple of stories about other people's experience of that just help you maybe to think about your own experience and the experience of people who you, either people in your life or people you work with in a professional sense. So I guess it's very tempting for us to, for us human beings, for us to believe that things will happen to others and they won't happen to us. And so we tend to think, well, that person got very sick because they smoke, or they eat bad food, or they've been living in a toxic environment, these sorts of things. So we make these exceptions, and we think if we avoid these things in our own lives, that somehow we'll be okay, we'll avoid the experience for ourselves, will be safe. But then inevitably life intervenes, and so we might hear a story about our neighbour, for example, who ate some long mushrooms. It's very interesting, isn't it?
That's funny.
Do people still do that?
Magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
Probably.
That was in my youth. I'm not sure they go out into the forest anymore and do these things. Or someone, I guess, perhaps a relative, a little bit addled maybe, walks out onto the road and knocked down by a car. So I guess it just brings it a little bit closer to us. It's no longer a story in the newspaper. It's it's kind of entered in more into a closer domain. And we think, well, why is it that some of these people, why is it that they experience such suffering? And particularly, we think that, for example, for when a child dies, or someone who's we think of as a very good person, comes down with a very powerful and destructive illness, very painful. These questions arise in our mind. Yeah.
I believe the most sensitive and people who they love, people forgive, and anybody, people like this can get much easier depressed than a person who's really can be strong in different situations.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
don't you think?
Maybe.
If the sensitivity is very deep,
Mm.
I can take you much quickly at the end than another person which is saying, I don't care, forget it or something. Well, yeah, from my experiences. Yeah.
Well, I guess our experience is the best measurement, really,
Of course.
as long as we're able
Even
to
doctors
see.
or psychiatrists and psychologists, they only read in the books, but from your own experience, you can teach them even.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing with our own experience is, we need to bear in mind that the way that we understand the experience is viewed through potentially a mind that maybe is not clear at the time, is clouded,
Yeah.
or narrow. So I think, in our experience, we still have to put that under the microscope and say, what is the fact of what we've experienced, rather than the emotional overlay of that, or the old stories and judgments that we bring to bear on our experience. So, yes.
And so you were saying earlier about what happens when there is a child that dies or someone who's a good person who falls ill, and I don't think you got to finish.
Thank you. Yes, so I guess, these are the things that, that for us as human beings, they raise these questions in our mind, those existential questions about, why does this happen? What's it all about? What's life about? And I suppose, again, I mean, for each of us, we search for meaning in our own way. But again, Buddha has given us a very clear teaching that helps us to understand that. And the teaching is really that we look at our own experience and the world around us through a very narrow beam. And so, we can't fully understand
Unhappy marriages
these questions.
can make you sigh and sigh because you have babies, you have children, and then say, where I go, no money, not know the language, because of my experience. Can I talk about it? I come when I was nearly 18, and I married after a few months. The man, my uncles, if you want that man or something. And the thing is, I was the strongest person. When I was pregnant with my third child, I had the most big, huge problem with my ex-husband. I had the baby, I went home. After 40 days, I got up one morning, I didn't know who I was. Never happened with my 2 girls before. And then I had to be treated in a hospital for, I didn't know what would happen to me, just like that. So it took quite a long time to find the right. And thank God, the doctor he believed in meditation, relaxation, and he put someone and he helped me every night. I get meditation, I can concentrate till I come to the point to enjoy that and feel that here and in my mind, in my soul, my heart, and that saved my life. That's why I believe so much in that kind of thing.
So I guess people would say you're very fortunate
Yeah,
to have had that opportunity.
exactly.
But in the teaching of the Buddha, of the law of cause and effect, is that what we experience in this lifetime is actually an outcome from previous lifetimes. So even though we can't understand sometimes, why something bad might happen to us, or something good even, sometimes we're astounded wonder why this is happening to us.
Even
But I guess there's always some link, and we're not able to see that.
That point.
So in your case, perhaps, you know, there was something earlier in your life, or in a previous life, that you did, that actually brought that person to you at that time when you were really in need, and offered you the meditation rather than perhaps the alternative.
Like God sent this doctor, but just for me, I didn't have an idea about that. Nothing. It helps my life. Which is, I believe, very much.
Yeah. So I guess that, you know, we have the opportunity to, you know, to reflect in a, you know, in a way that gives us perspective when we understand that teaching. So that, for example, you know, perhaps when a child dies young, you know, we don't know. Perhaps there was something in their past life that you know, gave rise to that experience. While they may have been you know, very kind, gentle people in this lifetime, perhaps in the last lifetime, you know, there wasn't so much of that kindness in them, and you know, we can't really know, and it's not that helpful to make you know, kind of quick decisions and conclusions about it, but just to know that there is nothing that comes to us in our life experience that hasn't come from a seed of something in our past life experience. And so, you know, the Buddha really, the teaching is not about good or bad experience, it's not about right or wrong, it's about, you know, just this is our experience, how we deal with it, how we relate to it. That's the you know, the choice that we have as human beings, to be able to make decisions about how we interface with our experience, and how we interface with our experience can give rise to the next experience in our lives. So we can transform happiness as happiness to sadness, sadness to happiness. You know, we can also, you know, ameliorate the difficult feelings by recognising, you know, the truth of impermanence and the law of cause and effect as influential aspects of formation in our lives. So I want to tell you about a story about a woman who lost her husband, and he died of a terminal illness. And a couple of years after his death, this woman was still suffering. She described her experience as being caught in a very deep, dark well, you know, like a cage that she couldn't climb out of, and just felt very trapped. And you know, she wasn't religious. She, in fact, identified herself as an atheist. But she felt so helpless, so hopeless, so overwhelmed by this grief, she decided to try prayer. And so she applied herself to it, and every day she made effort in a very sincere way to pray. And the grief continued, the despair continued, it didn't abate, until one day, and she was praying, an image came to her, a photo in her mind of, and it was a photo taken during the Vietnam War, And it was a photo of a young woman holding her dead baby in her arms, and she was looking up to the sky in anguish. And this picture just broke through this woman's grief. And something in her, you know, really, it's like she understood something new. She understood that her experience wasn't unique, that she wasn't alone in her suffering, that it is shared by many. And the loss, the anguish of this young woman holding the baby, you know, her heart poured out to this young mother. So I guess, you know, we you know, the mind is very powerful, and we may feel that we're trapped in these feelings, that there's no way out, and this feeling of how could anyone possibly understand what we're going through. You know, it's no one else feels as bad as I do. No one can understand. But all around us, of course, you know, we see this suffering, and we know that the living are few and the dead are many. And this too is our fate. Then there's the story of the mustard seed. Who knows the mustard seed story? Kisagotami. Yeah, so very famous Buddhist story of a woman in the time of the Buddha, and she lost her son, a young son, and she as any mother would be, you know, was grief-stricken, and she went from neighbour to neighbour, house to house in her village, begging for help, you know, begging the neighbours to help her to bring this child back to life. And the neighbours, of course, were, not of course, but I mean they were deeply sympathetic, and you know, they felt great compassion for this young woman. But as they said, there's nothing we can do. And then one neighbour said to her, why don't you go and ask the Buddha? So Kisagotami went and found the Buddha, and she said to the Buddha, please, begged the Buddha, please bring my child back to life, restore my child. And the Buddha, of course, was, you know, deeply moved by this woman's experience. But he didn't say to her, well, I can't do that. He didn't say, that's silly, or, you know. He said to her, Kisagotama, go back to your own village. And when you get back to your village, go again, house to house, neighbour to neighbour, and collect a mustard seed from every house where they have been untouched by death. So, any house that's not been touched with death, collect a mustard seed. And when you've done that, bring the mustard seeds back to me, and I will make a potion, and I will restore your child. So Kisagotami was overjoyed, of course, and she trusted the Buddha and had deep faith in his teachings. So you know, she went off very quickly and very joyfully to do this task. And so she went from house to house, and you know, one after another said, look, we'd really like to help you, we really, you know, we feel for you, but you know, this house has been touched by death many times, and so we can't help you. And so after coming to the last house in the village, she finally awakened to a new understanding. She realised that this is the human experience. Every house, every person, every being, is touched by death. And so she didn't immediately go back to the Buddha. She went home and she picked up the body of her child where she'd left it, and she took the child to the cremation ground, and she did a very gentle and sensitive ritual and gave her son a very beautiful, burial and leaving ceremony. And then she went back to the Buddha and she said, "Now I understand." And so she asked him, "Can I follow you?" And he said, "Yes, come." As was his way. He would say, "Come, Bhikkhu, come, Bhikkhuni." And so Kisa Gotami became one of the early Bhikkhuni, the female daughters of the Buddha. And in fact she was the first of the Bhikkhuni, the female arahats, the enlightened ones. And so this experience, was very deeply impacting for her. It awakened her to this truth of suffering, the truth of death, the truth of impermanence. But she turned that into a very positive life path. And this is what we really have the potential to do. So not to get stuck in that, those feelings and overwhelming helplessness, hopelessness. Of course, we must honour the natural experience of grief and not try, kind of Pollyanna positive thinking of, it's just push it aside because that will create more problems. But if we can be with it in honesty and not...
They can be in every situation, isn't it?
Sorry?
They can be in every situation, except there can be any situation.
Yes.
Something strong,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we can make it feel this way.
So there's another story of a father who lost a son in a paragliding accident. And this son was the treasure of the mother and father, the only child. He was very bright. He was, the top of his class and had everything really ahead of him. And then he was taken very suddenly in this accident. And the father, just felt this really deep black hole in his heart, and just kind of gave up on life. And
He did. He killed himself.
No, not die, just give up on the day-to-day of living life. Just became trapped in the house, really very fearful, very caught in this very dark depression. And then he met a friend whose son had committed suicide, and this son had just passed his entrance exams for medical school, and he jumped off a tower and killed himself. And the father forbade the family to ever mention his name again. So what's worse than the loss of a loved one is the loss of a loved one that one is not able to mourn in a way that we can share that grief with others who also experience the loss of that same loved one. So this man started to understand that, while his grief was very real, and the loss was very deep in him that perhaps there were others who not only had the same experience but perhaps an even worse situation than his. Then he met another friend who confided that her 21-year-old brother had been killed in a boating accident. And so, I guess the interesting thing is, how when something kind of touches our mind, hits our mind, something becomes sort of as if it's something we've never come across before, some idea or some, perhaps plan or something, and then it's like everywhere we start to hear about this thing. It's as if the world is singularly awakened to this thing that's in our mind. But of course, what it means is that we've become more focused, more attentive to this, and because of that, it draws into our view things that reflect this same subject matter. And so, in this case, what these people are experiencing is, when they've allowed just a little glimmer of light into that darkness in themselves, then other examples, other experiences have come close to them, so that they can start to understand the shared experience of human life. So, what else can I tell you? So another story is kind of interesting from another perspective. Again, a woman whose husband died, and in her grieving, she got caught. She felt she was in this kind of never-ending cycle, going round and round, and couldn't kind of find an exit point in it. Her life just seemed to follow this same trajectory every day. And then one day, so she started to meditate, tried to meditate, just to, kind of sit and try to be still and let her mind be. And then in the course of this, she saw in her mind her mental pattern that she had, kind of established in relation to this loss. This way of thinking that continued to keep her caught in this cycle. And she realised that this thinking in her was, I can't live without him. I can't live alone. I don't want to go on. Well, it's like that record that goes round and round and round, and in her mind, she wasn't actually aware of it consciously at a very conscious level, but subliminally, it was very impactful. But when she decided to just try something different, and she decided to sit, this was able to show itself to her. And of course, when she saw it and could see the truth of it, then she was able to move on from that. And she could also see in that pattern in herself, the tremendous grasping, and the tremendous need to hold, not to let go. So that's again one of the teachings of the Buddha is the importance of finding some practice, some sort of way that we can spend some time with ourselves and just be still and listen and observe our mind. And that's all we really need to do. We don't need to change ourselves. People think, we have to change ourselves somehow, whip ourselves. But actually it's in the seeing of it. It's in the seeing of it and the acceptance of it. So when we see, the hurt, we see the sadness, we see the mental patterns, we see the emotions of fear, of anger, of jealousy, of vengeance, whatever. If we can honestly look upon those arisings in the mind, then they will disappear, they'll dissolve. As long as we resist acknowledging or touching those stories within ourselves, they will continue and they'll grow in magnitude. So in our Western culture, of course, we kind of have the belief, and everything in the world around us supports that, in the advertising and the television, everything, that to be happy, to be beautiful, to be young, to be rich, to be successful is normal. But of course the Buddha says to be happy, truly happy, to be not suffering is very abnormal in our conditioned world.
I think that's the key of life, to be happy.
Sorry?
The key of life is happiness.
Yes.
And love and happiness.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I suppose we need to make the distinction between the happiness that comes from having and getting and holding, and the happiness that comes from being and letting go and accepting.
Do you believe love is the bigger things in humanity? Innocent love?
Sorry?
Innocent love to each other. Innocent love.
I don't
all
really
this
know what innocent
humanity.
love is.
Innocent love, like I know you and I love you, innocent.
You mean unconditional?
Unconditional.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Unconditional.
Yes. Not easy. Not easy.
No.
No.
For some people it's easy.
Well, I think we all have
When they can be
degrees
trained,
of...
they get really, yeah. True.
Okay, yeah. So the Buddha also taught that, I guess this feeling of dissatisfaction, of unease, is something that, is with us, that's pervasive really in us for as long as we remain in this samsaric consciousness. So the myth of happiness in the world sense can be a very powerful message to people, and this can set up counter thoughts and experiences within us if we judge ourselves by that, that external kind of measurement. And so people, will often find themselves, trying to mirror in themselves. The messages that beam at them in all sorts of ways, and that just really heightens their sense of not good enough, not beautiful enough, not successful enough, not healthy enough, not clever enough. Now these messages are, they're kind of instilled in us from the earliest age, and these messages become the deepest beliefs that our life is premised on. So some people go through their whole lives, really not living in the true sense, but living, in a kind of past realm of being motivated by these old messages that have been laid down. So we all have some of these, at some early times we internalise the message. We're not as clever as our brother, or we're not as attractive as our first cousin, or these sorts of things. And I guess if we don't stop and see that in ourselves and really look and challenge that belief, then our life will continue to be led by those kinds of messages. So the importance of actually finding some time and just space and making some effort to just to sit quietly and just really come to ourselves and get to know ourselves better in the inner knowing rather than the external reflection is very important. So death is certain, but when? Why? When? How? Where? We don't know. But the Buddha says to reflect on death is a very important thing. It's also very liberating. Some people might think that that's very maudlin. But actually, what is the greatest liberation that we can have is to face the truth of that in ourselves. Then we're really truly free to live for every moment that we have,
Exactly.
for all of the life that we have. Because as long as we're running away from death, as long as we're avoiding thinking about it or, kind of facing the reality of it, the more that the denial builds fear in us.
And loneliness, a lot of people don't get friends, so they did not to go somewhere, they want some really good friends to get out, and they start home instead. Yeah, which is a good thing. Even here we can be good friends, We can open a heart and go for a coffee together, laugh and do something, But it's good to meet people, I believe that, yeah.
So it's interesting in our culture that I think there's probably been a little bit of a shift. I think, a couple of decades ago, there was quite a move away from kind of sanitising death, putting it, but I think there's been a bit of a shift in the way that there is more interest in people to want to talk about it, to want to kind of have the opportunity to speak of their own views of it, or fears, or experiences of it. we see things like death cafes. You know of death cafes? Yeah. So they.
It's not breakfast.
Saying get together and
Someone else.
Yeah.
It was on breakfast TV. The National Breakfast TV was saying we want to reflect more on that.
Wasn't
That's what I thought. That was very strange.
Yeah. I actually, with another person, we ran some death cafes in Melbourne.
What did
And
you
it was very interesting, because what happens is you send an invite out to people, and the invite can go out to communities, and, so it's not necessarily individual people. You'll decide on a venue, and
Like what?
and well, it could be a cafe. So we used a cafe a couple of times. So we negotiated with a cafe.
Every afternoon tea means one of us play something.
Yeah, so a cafe or you could use your home or whatever, and bring people together.
Yes.
And basically, all you're doing is providing the venue and tea and coffee, and bringing people together.
Yeah.
And the conversation begins, and it's really hard shutting people up. It's amazing. You think, this would be a very difficult subject.
So those invitations come.
We're not going to drink only, but we can have conversation, with ourselves there for different things.
So maybe the fears are breaking down a little in that regard. And I guess there's this sense too in a way they're breaking down, but I guess the counter, something I see of the counter kind of reaction to that is in the movement of such as advanced care planning, which you're probably very familiar with, where I think that the initiative is very wonderful, but sometimes the way that people grab that as a possibility to control everything about their time and way beyond their death. So I think there's a bit of both happening. I was someone that I was working with in Melbourne over a couple of years who had been diagnosed as terminally ill, and she lived for another 3.5 years. And so she wrote her requests for her funeral and disposal, etc., and extraordinary the amount of detail. And the control factor was absolutely enormous. And her daughter came to me, and she was just in tears, and she said, "How do I do this?" She was just really distraught and felt so burdened by the need to do everything that her mother had required. Otherwise, she would just feel very guilty. And it's really hard, actually, to help her to let go of a little bit of that, and just to recognise that this was her mother's fear. Speaking through the control factor in this document. So even in the idea, of course, of the advanced care planning is that that we can actually come to know ourselves better, and we have the opportunity really to reflect on what's important to us, and to actually have those conversations with the people that are close to us before the end point. So I think that's a very positive opportunity, and probably most people approach it in that way, but I still think it's very hard to get people to actually make advanced care plans. People still are very reluctant, I think, and doctors are very reluctant in hospital settings to follow the plans. Very inconvenient. So
that's a better opinion, because when you get together people with it. They can be more positive, talking for different things, not only for sickness and things like that. And be I like this, something make you happy, things like that.
That's right.
If we're negative all the time, we just never positively come around.
I think some people who, you know, in the, when I was working in palliative care, I came across, you know, people who, given a diagnosis of terminal illness, actually came alive. So, you know, several people would say to me, in fact, the best thing that ever happened to me was that I received this diagnosis, because before that I wasn't really living. And so we can see in that the power of, you know, coming face to face with it. And, you know, obviously most people it wouldn't have been an immediate turnaround, but having gone through that process of grieving, you know, the loss and the impending loss of life, they recognise that, you know, what a wonderful opportunity to actually live before they died. So, yeah, so there's not, death is not all negative. So we've, so look, it's already, the time goes so quickly. Okay, so we're going to actually just finish with a meditation.